artwork on American Gods or have already started. I mean, if Hannibal does get picked up for another season or even a film, how are you going to balance the two?
I would find a way.
Okay.
You heard it. You heard it. When?
Great.
I would find a way.
Okay.
Next, right there in the front.
Well, Richard's here, but what can you tease about more of what's to come with his character on this season?
Well, I'll let Richard answer that.
There's a lot of body, I noticed on that little, I don't remember spending so much time without my clothes on, but no, you get 6 episodes of that story arc, which really has only been explored in 2 movies for probably 90 minutes at a time, so it's a real chance to go to that book, which is incredibly detailed, and look at the backstory of where Francis Dolarhyde came from and how he's emerged as this strange, this man that's complicated and dark and at the same time innocent and romantic. And so hopefully we're gonna open that story up a bit.
Courtney?
So, Fannibals don't understand why the show doesn't have a home yet. What are some of the challenges that you're up against?
Some of the challenges are that once NBC passes on a 4th season, that kind of dismantles a lot of our international funding. So a lot of international channels need an American broadcaster to say, like, this is the American TV show on this network, and that gives them a platform to which they can sell the show. But without that, we lose our Sony component, which is also our AXN channels, and so we've lost a lot of our channels all over the world. So that's one of the big hurdles. We don't just lose NBC, we lose AXN Latin, AXN Japan, AXN Korea, AXN Brazil. We lose all of those. So then it's back to square one to figure out a financial model for the show.
Can this season, the season finale, serve as a series finale as it stands right now?
Yes.
Yes, if it had to, it could. It would be satisfying in that respect. It could also serve as a good jumping-off point for another season.
If a broadcaster said, we want you guys, but you're going to have to change this and this, how far are you ready to change your show to survive?
Totally.
Well, the idea for season 4...
It'd be a very weird thing for them to say, though, wouldn't it?
We like you, but change. The idea for season 4 is a reinvention of the Hannibal Will Graham dynamic in a huge way. So there is an opportunity to reinvent the show as well as the format in which we tell the show.
For Will, we've always kind of been in his psyche, especially in the 1st season and 2nd season, but we've always kind of known where the line of reality and fantasy of what is in his head, we've always kind of known where that is. And with this new season, we've kind of seen that blur. I mean, when I watch those episodes where you genuinely think people who are alive aren't alive.
Right.
And how is that playing that for you, Hugh, like, how has that been going, and have you been preparing differently for that as opposed to some of the other seasons and kind of pushing it, or?
I think that, partially because we were totally freed from that, weekly crime of the week, whatever you want to call it, that more procedural element, and Bryan was able to write in a much more free-form kind of way, and as a result was able to explore that kind of looping, circular nature of grief and trauma. Such that it took me a while after reading the first 2-3 scripts to really, understand what I at least understood him to be doing, and with the nature of time, and really, so it did take me a while to kind of dig down into what I understood to be rattling around in Will's head. It was different, really provocative stuff. I thought. The kind of meditations on religion and belief and so on, but it wasn't a different guy exactly. Clearly Will's always had that capacity to create a reality around him or be the victim of an imagined reality, just taken to a greater extreme.
Bryan, can you talk a little about how this season was kind of an adaptation of Hannibal, the book,
Yes.
and then you're doing Red Dragon, so you're kind of playing with chronology a little bit, and why you decided to do it that way?
Well, part of it was I felt like if we were to sustain the Italian chapter for an entire season, there would be episodes that might tread a little water. And, you know, we had episodes still that treaded some water and that got into some psychological stuff. But it was also an awareness of the scythe over our heads, and NBC has been so fantastic and supportive of us in allowing us to tell a story that no other network would allow us to do. And part of that gentleman's agreement with Jen Sulky, who's the president of entertainment, was, I will let you do the show that you want to do, and I can protect the show as long as we're above a 0.5. And once we went below a 0.5 rating, I knew Jen wouldn't be able to protect us from the schedulers at NBC who were like, we can't sell this at upfronts because, you know, nobody's going to buy advertising at top dollar rates for a 0.5 rating. So I was aware that this was going to be our last season in many ways, so I kind of wanted to get as much in there, and I thought if we don't do Red Dragon now, we might not be able to.
Agree?
Yeah, going back to what she said one moment ago, the procedural element of the show, is that something either of you, Hugh or Bryan, missed at all, or was it kind of like a means to an end to get where you are now?
You know, in some ways, I suppose, playing characters and in this world that could be so kind of floating, like occasionally being tethered down, was not such a bad thing. That said, like I remember, you know, you approaching that first season and having really worked to figure out who this guy was and what was underlying all of his kind of angst and, you know, so on. There were only so many ways I could be emotionally affected by these crimes, you know, week in, week out. Because Bryan's writing is always emotional. There's always, if you dig down, you can find it. But you know, any procedural, certain elements that are repeated, you know.
And clinical.
And clinical, yeah. And so trying to find the emotional response of the character to that felt like it could have become like a bit forced had we had to continue in that way.
And it was fun for us in the writers' room to not have that as a crutch for the storytelling, because so often when we were breaking those stories, it was like, okay, now a body has to drop, and what's the metaphor of the death tableau? And it was a spine to a lot of the storytelling, and when we jerked that spine out of the body, like the Predator, it kind of left us with this slightly amorphous yet emotionally sound psychological tale that didn't have that buttressing, and so it was fun for me as somebody who loves the pretension in Thomas Harris's writing, and it's so beautiful and purple and articulate that I wanted this season to smack of Thomas Harris in a way that we haven't in the first two seasons.
In the back.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I absolutely loved the Hannibal episode that didn't have Hannibal, where it focused on all the characters he basically had broken,
Yeah.
and how the transformation of Lana and Frederick Chilton kind of came to be, and how that affected the way you acted alongside with them.
Can you ask that again? I was trying to. I got lost in the question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The episode where you focused on all the characters that Hannibal had basically broken,
Right.
Especially Alana, who I just was amazed by that wonderful performance that she did.
She was great in that
She
episode.
was so great, and Raoul as Frederick and the whole thing. I just absolutely loved it. And I was wondering if you could talk to the changes in her character as well as Frederick's, because he's just looking for allies to sort of produce a Justice League of Doom for Hannibal Lecter.
Right.
And Alana as well, just that change to her is so great.
Well, it was really about owing Caroline more than what we had done with her character in the second season. She became the girlfriend in many ways, and so she was triangulated against Will and Hannibal in a way that she was the girl, for lack of a better word, and the first thing I said to the writers when we sat down for season 3 is that it is our mission to make Alana the most interesting character on the show, to go through the biggest transformation, because I felt like we owed it to Caroline, and I wanted to see how she was broken and how she reformed and how she found her strength again, and I knew Caroline would knock it out of the park. So I was inspired by her as an actress to give her more.
You also gave that mandate as the character of Bedelia,
Yes.
those two females.
You confirmed already that Amazon and Netflix passed on the show, but what about Hulu or Yahoo Screen?
They haven't passed yet, that I'm aware of.
Hugh, if you could have the ending that you wanted to see between Hannibal and Will, what would it look like?
That's difficult. What I will say is that Bryan, just in kind of casual conversation, like maybe a few weeks before we finished filming the season that's airing right now, described, as we were kind of talking about how it was going to conclude this season, I mean, he then started to describe how he imagined that might play out in a prospective 4th season or feature film, whatever it might be at this stage. And it, as he already said, was such a different place for them to go. And I mean, all I can tell you is I just thought it sounded fascinating and really like almost a kind of amazing inversion and return to the first season, but a new kind of storytelling. So that's how I would like the story to end between them, at the very least. But again, like, you know, if we don't get past what we've shot, if that's the conclusion, I think it will be, you know, every season that we've shot so far has concluded in a way, as Bryan said, there was always like a sword of Damocles hanging over us, right? And with that in mind, it will be satisfying.
In the back.
Hi, Richard.
Hey.
How deep did you have to go in your research for a character like Francis Dollarhide, and how do you find the humanity in a character so twisted?
I think it's really down to Thomas Harris writing. He really explores the childhood, the damaged child that he created in Francis Dollarhide, and it sort of doesn't track in a linear way. So you delve back into his past so you learn about his crimes first, and then you retrace where they came from. I usually do that kind of work myself anyway, but I didn't need to do any of it. The biography was there, and all I needed to do was really kind of make the connection between the original source material and what Bryan and the writers were putting together. But in terms of how deep it was, I mean, it was obviously all just in the imagination. There was no real practical way of accessing it. And staying with the humour of the cast and crew that work on it, because if you don't, then it's a terribly dark and depressing place to visit. But it was a very buoyant shoot, really.
Can you find a humanity in a character that's that twisted?
I hope so. I feel like maybe we did, but I don't know yet because I haven't seen the whole thing in its entirety. We'll find out if people relate to him.
We were in the editing room with the editors, and there were several scenes where both the editor and I, who's sitting up in front of me, and I'm behind him, and we were both surreptitiously like wiping a tear out of the corner of our eyes, because it's heartbreaking. You feel so badly for this man who's struggling against his insanity to find love, and it's that thing that makes him so intimately relatable to the audience. And you're looking at these scenes between Regina Wesley and Richard. Both of them are wonderful and have wonderful chemistry, and you're just like, so he killed some families, just like get on with the love. So it's really a great performance. I can't wait for you to see it.
In the pink sweater.
Can you talk about what the experience of doing the show has meant to you guys, and also why you think fans gravitated towards the show in such wonderful hordes, basically?
Well, we were actually just talking about this coming out of our panel and being in front of so many that they have stayed with the show from the first season, first episode. And what they immediately started to identify with were both characters, Bill Graham or Hannibal Lecter. And they shipped those roles, is that what you're saying? So they anagrams. And they just became a terrific, huge collective. And it grew, and they're smart. You know, we're talking about this as well, as our audience is, I would say, a more mature, smarter audience that appreciates the subtleties, appreciates the just the scale of which things are done, from the music, from the cinematography, from the cast, the sets, the writing. So it's given them a lot to play on, and we appreciate that. You know, that's what's supported us.
I think in an interesting way, since the show is fan fiction, I'm a huge Thomas Harris fan, and it's not a literal adaptation, even though so much of the literature does make it into the show. It is, I think, relatable to that community who are also fan fiction writers and storytellers. So I respect when they twist it around in really interesting ways and have very strange illustrations of Maz and Hugh often chewing each other's penises off. And it's like, well, God bless them.
Like, often.
It happens.
So could you talk then about what the show has meant to you guys?
Yes, segue. An enormous amount to me, on every level. It's been challenging in the work and unique in that respect. Unique as what has felt like an incredible collaboration because of Bryan's generosity in that respect. Collaboration with Maz, who I love, she's a wonderful actor and an incredible partner in that respect. But going way beyond that and way beyond all of us here, it's been like a really kind of one of a kind. Like, this is very bittersweet being here. You know, we don't know what the future of the show is, if there is a future for the show, but it's like part celebration and it's part a kind of something else. Yeah. You know? Because I don't expect to have an experience of this nature for a long time, if ever again. And that's no bad thing. It's just because it's been so profound.
One of the things that was very satisfying for me in telling the story as someone who's interpreting another writer's work is that it wasn't mine, so I didn't have the arrogance of saying, like, no, this is the right way. I mean, I did for a lot of things, but it also left room to collaborate with Hugh and Maz and Richard on the Red Dragon in ways that they saved my ass when I was staring at a script going what is missing from this? And Hugh would call and we would have a 2-hour conversation about what was missing, and he would help me figure it out.
For me, it was important. It's the first thing that I've done out of the gate since Dino passed. It's almost 5 years ago. So it was something that he had been involved with so long, and he and I were very good friends with Thomas Harris, and so a lot of things just kind of where I knew he was always on my shoulder, and that this happened for a reason. That I met Bryan when I did shortly after, and that things came together. Then immediately we met Hugh and then Maz. And then it just exponentially, took off, and I'm very grateful for that. So that means a lot to me.
Mm.
I had a question. So with the intelligence and the artistry of the show, that's not always accessible to like the mainstream crowd. The fans of Hannibal are not casual fans; they're passionate fans. Was there a defining moment for you? I mean, all the fans, I'm sure, have a moment where we realized what we actually had given to us. I mean, was there a moment for you where you realized what you really had, like what you created, and what really hit you? Was there a moment?
I think coming into, it was either the first season or the second season, convention hall, and seeing how many young women were in the audience, and that delighted me to no end, to have a relationship with a fan community that was young people who were very intelligent, very articulate, very open to new and weird things, and being able to champion them as individuals as they have championed the show. That was a pretty great moment.
If you come back for another season or a movie, do you think you'll be able to get all of the key players back? Are you pretty confident about that?
Everybody is really fond of each other.
What was sort of the most important thing for you about showing the first, I guess, real face-to-face conversation between Will and Hannibal, I guess before the time jump coming in this season? Like, what weight did you need to have? How'd you go into that? And also, objectively, for all of you, who do you think is the smartest character on the show, given what Bedelia pulled in the last episode?
I've always said Bedelia is the smartest character on the show. And part of that is because I love Gillian Anderson and grew up with Scully and wanted to write for her. What was the first part of the question?
The first conversation, face-to-face, real life, between Will and Hannibal this season, what did you need for that to do?
In last Thursday's episode?
In the gallery.
Easy.
I mean, I thought it had to kind of a lot to accomplish a huge amount. I had to explain why Will had been on this kind of looping path to get back to Hannibal, when in some sense I felt like he probably could have found him in a day. It needed to express some kind. I mean, that first half of the show, just for myself, it felt like a kind of quest of sorts, and it needed to give a sense of what the purpose of that quest had been, even if he didn't know the purpose when he set off.
And that was another great example of how fantastic Hugh is to collaborate with. There's a lot of dialogue in that scene where Hugh was saying, I feel like Will would be saying that he feels responsible for every crime that Hannibal has committed, every crime that he will commit, because he's gotten so close to that. And it was so great to hear that from a creative storytelling partner, because I was like, it's going in the script. I couldn't break that up. So, it's great.
He does type like that.
I love
Fancy typing.
But I love the etching of the Primavera, and you had Will Graham's face and Bedelia's.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was on the screen long enough for everybody to see. Wasn't that so cool?
Wait till you see Will and Bedelia in the second half of the season, and they're kind of bitchy. They're kind of bitchy.
Yeah. But there was a second part to that question.
Smartest character on the show, in
Oh,
your
yeah.
opinion?
I don't know, but I think that Hannibal is always the smartest guy in the room, just to some extent. Like he can slip up by virtue of his vanity or whatever, but
Or his affection for Will.
or his affection for Will. Like he eventually, that is a genuine source of maybe vulnerability, but he's always kind of one step ahead. I mean, he's not infallible, but he's the next best thing.
Richard, how about you, like, from watching?
Whoever managed to create that origami heart, like some kind of biological Rubik's Cube, that person is the smartest person.
One more question.
I've read some reports that if things go on, as we hope they do, that Clarice might be introduced, and I guess two-part. How might we see her introduced, and who else would you, given your carte blanche, like to see added to the future?
Well, the Clarice rights have always been tricky because they're owned by MGM, and the way the rights break down with the novels is that the character Martha has the rights to everybody in Red Dragon, and every character is originated in Red Dragon, so they track through all of the books, but she doesn't have the rights to whoever originated in Silence of the Lambs. So Buffalo Bill, Clarice, Barney, Ardella Map, those characters, which are all very fantastic, we don't have rights to, but we tried every year. We go back to them, and at first it was a hard no, and then it was like ask us later, and then it was ask us again next year. So because the show may be changing formats, it may not be possible, or if we, in the change of the formats, we're able to work out a deal where we can include those things, it would be fantastic. I love Ellen Page. I think she would be a great Clarice. But I also love the idea of casting somebody who's not white in that role, and having race play a factor in Clarice's background in a way that race plays a factor in everybody's background. So I think that would be an interesting exploration of the character.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks. Look at all these phones we get.
Now, of course, I have to figure out which one's which.